kick off now. So we are, as I say, we're going to be covering the ways that you can effectively measure your safety culture. So we've got some ideas around, I've got some ideas around the way this is being done currently by a lot of companies and how they're using that data, and very often how ineffectively they're using the data. So hopefully this will help if you're planning to get to carry out a safety culture assessment of your own. And if you have done in the past and maybe it wasn't that effective, then hopefully this will help to improve the way that you can carry it out in the future and give you the data you need. We are then going to be looking at, within that, the different types of data that come back when you've carried out an assessment, and again, how difficult that can be to interpret and put into real practice. And then finally, we're going to just quickly look at the way that benchmarking can help once you've got some idea of your level of culture assessment. Okay, so clicking on and hoping that things stay sure, they are on target. So maybe some of you out there have already done a measure of the culture, your safety culture, or maybe you are not sure what it's like in your organisation, really, constructively, because it can be quite a difficult thing to get your head around, really. It's not something that's that tangible. And so maybe that's the position you're in at the moment. Maybe you don't think you have one in your organisation. I hear people say this, well, we've never really measured it. We haven't really got to safety culture yet. You know, we're still looking at process and procedure. We are, you know, we don't really have a culture in our organisation. Well, yes, you do. It may not be the one you want it to be. It is often a belief that because we haven't really looked at it, it's not there. But it is there, and it can be very much acting against you in your best efforts to improve the safety performance within the organisation. So as I say, it may not be what you think it is, and it may not be what you want it to be, but it is there, and there is the cultural element of the way people interact with each other and the way people engage with each other is very crucial in the success of your, as I say, your safety improvements and your safety change programs that you want to get going. So, for example, some cultures are still at the safety cultures are still very much taking a back seat to that of production and the performance of output in terms of whatever your organisation makes or produces or the service it provides is the key focus, and that is what is rewarded within your organisation, and safety is seen very much a second place to that. There can be a culture that's developed where ticking boxes and auditing and inspection are rife and have been driven to increase activity in terms of getting people out there looking for safety problems, but they often end up becoming a tick box exercise for the people who have to do them. And we're going to talk a bit more about this in depth in a minute when we move on, because there's a danger there that it can sort of undermine the principles of what you started out to achieve with that type of process. And then, of course, we have the good old, oh, health and safety, it's all a bit too much nowadays. It stops me doing the job. You will very often will find that companies have done a lot in terms of improving safety performance and safety procedures, still have quite a negative, are still held in quite a negative view by a lot of the workforce who have to put it into practice. Okay, so how can we measure safety culture? Well, there's various ways. I'm sure you maybe, you know, the reason you're ringing into this is because this is an area of interest, and as I say, you may have done some level of culture assessment yourself. One of the things you can start to do is to look at the outputs of the safety management systems that you've been putting into place, and very often things like how many incidents are reported, near misses are reported, and the type of closeout that is happening, how effectively that happens, is often a statistic that I see on notice boards when I go around sites. We're very proud of the fact that when something's reported, we're very quick at closing it out. And, that's great because you've got some concrete evidence that actions happen, and things are followed up. So that's quite, those types of real tangibles are quite a useful way of getting some benchmarks that, in your mind, that actions happen when you are expecting people to take responsibility within their role. So things like, how many toolbox talks happen, or how many site inspections or walk rounds, or again, these types of tangible things, you can actually keep a score quite literally that within a particular area there are, the staff are getting a toolbox talk a month and 2 site inspections or whatever it might be. And again, these are tangible things that you can count and record. Another area may be to look at your training and the education levels of the staff you have. It's highly unlikely that they will adopt the safest route with their job just off their own back. People adopt the safest route that they see, which very often means they miss a lot of the hazards that are attached to their job because they've been doing it a long time. They have that complacency element. They know where the risk is that they feel when they do the job, and they may take precautions around that. But a lot of the other areas, they do need training and education in what risk is really, what risks are really there. Now, the problems with looking at this sort of area, as I've said, is the danger that expecting people to do 2 talks, supervisors to do 2 toolbox talks or 3 site walk rounds or whatever, becomes an exercise in itself. So the toolbox talks are put on to tick the box of doing the toolbox talk, and the supervisor has met that target. The actual content of the toolbox talk and whether anybody listens to it is sort of an irrelevance really, because they've sat there, they've drunk their tea, they've written on the bottom of the sheet that they've attended, job done. So the process itself and the effectiveness of that process itself is the key area you need to look at, not the number of things that are happening. So equally, are near misses coming in, are incidents being reported? Great. But what is the effectiveness of the closeout? Are they a quick knee-jerk reaction that people just do in order to say they've closed it out in the time given, but actually end up with the same incidents reoccurring? Because if this is the sort of thing that goes on, then they're not being closed out effectively for the right reasons. Again, they're closed out to meet the target. So although this area can give us quite some interesting insights into the activities that are going on, you want to look behind that as to the effectiveness of the actions that are coming out of this. So site inspections, another one. How much do people report and things just don't actually happen? How much are still left, and then the next inspection it picks it up again. So it's that sort of level of follow-up that will start to tell you what, how effective these processes are, but also how strong is the culture within the area of the organisation that has to do these things. How strongly do they support the safety message? So are they doing a toolbox talk with conviction and because they know that it's a good thing to do for their team, or are they doing it to tick a box? If they're in the first box, then you have a low level of culture. If they're doing it to tick the box, you have a low level of culture. If they're doing it with the right emphasis and the right passion behind it to improve the safety knowledge and information of their staff, you're way up to the cultural maturity level. And you will have pockets where some people are great champions, and you'll have pockets where some people are literally doing it to stop you coming after them because they haven't done their 2 toolbox talks or their site inspections. And you need to identify where this is effectively happening. Okay, I'm going to talk a bit more about how you can use this information and maybe the information from the culture assessment itself to be effective in how you roll out your next stage. Okay, now the other common way that people look at culture is to do some sort of surveying of staff. There's lots out there in various formats. I'm going to talk a little bit about the type of data you get back from this, as I say, because the one thing that's quite difficult to manage sometimes is the process itself and what it gives you. So they're asking that all the the culture surveys, sometimes called climate surveys, they ask a lot of different questions about various aspects of safety. And I'm going to come on to look at, if you're trying to put one together yourself, or if you're looking for one that's an effective one for you, then there are certain areas that it really must cover. And as I say, sometimes called climate surveys. So in order to get an effective picture of your safety culture, these are the 5 areas that you must get some information about. And so, as I say, if you're writing your own, then you must make sure you cover these 5 areas. Otherwise, you you may well get some very good detail about a particular area, but you're not looking at the wider picture of how these things link together. So I'll just quickly go through these. Obviously, leadership and commitment is what it says on the tin, really. What you're looking for there is the commitment and leadership of everyone, but in particular people who have a leadership role. So from your supervisors, your first line manager, upwards to the top, really. How committed are they to the safety message? Is the message they tell you that comes out of from their talks, from their actions, from their from the decisions they make, showing a commitment to safety, or is it something they just say on a Monday morning when they have the safety meeting? Effective leadership is vital. So you need to get a feel for that, and you need to see how that is working in practice. So like we were talking about with these outcomes from the walk round and the toolbox talks, etc., you need to see how effectively these are being managed and being encouraged and driven through the leadership team down through the ranks. Supervision. This is always an interesting one because on some sites they literally are supervised all the time. But by and large, what you're looking for with supervision is how effectively are your leaders supervising and challenging people when they see things that are unsafe? Because if they're not doing that, then there's no consequence for people's actions. And also, how much responsibility and how much do people personally take on board in terms of acting safely themselves when they're not supervised? So it's like the speed camera idea. If we want to try and reduce speed, and a camera stops the speeding for the camera, and then a lot of people speed up afterwards, it's not that effective in terms of actually doing it. It's a very short-term fix. And so supervision's a bit the same. If people only behave safely when there's a supervisor around, or on days when the manager's around, but on nights when there's no management and nobody's really interested in getting out of their office and they do what they want, then they're not adopting safe practice for the right reasons. They're doing it because they have to, not because they see it's the safest and best way to work. So again, that's quite a low level of cultural maturity, and that's an area you can really need to work on. But it'll only come as you engage with people. These things are all interlinked, and you help people to realise that safety, as they get engaged with the safety performance and the safety improvement process, they can be safer and work safer without it actually meaning that they work slower, which is very often one of their main concerns. Okay, engagement in improvement. So how much do people actually get involved in improvement? Is it something that is sort of cascaded from the safety department out and comes down to them? This is going to change tomorrow, and from tomorrow you'll do it like this. Or are they actually involved in the process of deciding how best to work? And again, employee responsibility. So how strong is the message of I hear the message, safety is my responsibility. People can recite that very clearly, but they don't understand what that means. So in order to look at that, you want to see whether people understand that it is the right thing to do and what you expect them to do. To things like, reporting things and not walking past things, and getting involved in things. Taking responsibility is about action, not just being able to recite that message. And obviously communication and education is crucial in order to raise people's awareness, in order to get that message through. And you need to know how effective these processes are when as you're gathering this data. So, what we were talking about at the beginning, the opening of the webinar this morning, I wanted to just talk about the different types of data that you get through these days. Now, one of the things I see a lot when I go help companies is often they've done a climate survey and they've got lots of very nice graphs that come through, because very often the survey questions are written to obtain a strongly agree to strongly disagree level of feedback. So people will rate a question and whether they agree with it or not. And that can be very useful, this type of data, in the sense of getting a feel for the strength of feeling people have about a particular area and issue. So you can get an idea whether a percentage or numbers in particular areas. And obviously the way that you break down how you've asked these questions and how you've asked people to, when you've asked people at the beginning of the survey to fill in where they are in the organisation, if you've asked that question, you can very often drill down at least by whether they're at a director level or middle management or supervisor level. You can drill down as to the layers of strength of feeling, and that may be very different from the top to the bottom of the organisation, depending on people's understanding of the question. Very often the top of the tree, the top of the organisation, has lots of awareness of targets and safety improvement programs and things that have gone on, because they've resourced it, they've been part of the planning of it. But the guys on the ground, their opinion of what's been going on, very key to the effectiveness of it as a program. And so their sort of understanding of how it helps them is really an interesting feedback for you in terms of whether your process of communication and implementation is effective. So as I say, fairly easy to interpret in terms of what you've got there, but it's difficult sometimes to actually turn it into practical action. So you may have different areas of the organisation if you've asked that question. So at the beginning of the survey, if you've asked people to put where they work in the organisation, you can maybe identify pockets that are not as happy in particular areas, if you like, or not as positive as other areas. And that can be quite interesting in terms of prioritising where you want to start. But what you actually do and how you actually make those improvements, what are you going to target, can sometimes be quite difficult to identify. And very often, off the back of climate surveys, there are sort of blanket recommendations that come out that are quite sweeping and may improve in some areas and actually completely undo the good work in others, because they haven't taken on board the real feeling of the people. Because you cannot gather that in a safety culture climate survey very easily. Now, I was just going to pause at this point and see if anybody had any questions. Have we had any hands up there, or anybody got any questions at the moment they'd like to ask?
Nobody with their hands up at the moment, Liz.
Okay, great. Okay, then I'll carry on. Okay, so taking that in mind then, how can we move on from just the standard climate survey type of feedback and data? And how can we actually improve how we are measuring culture. So if up to now you've done a climate survey, or like I say, you've written your own, so you may well be in that position of thinking, well, how are we best to implement this? And maybe you've tried things that you're not sure how effectively they've worked. Well, the key part you need to now think about, and this is something we do with our own in-house survey program here at JOMC, is that we are very much about focusing on the perceptions people have. And this is something, as I say, very difficult to gather in a standard climate tool. Perception is reality to people, and it's very much their focus is formed by their belief of the situation. And as I say, if you're going to target your improvement effectively and successfully, you really need to understand people's perceptions of safety and how it works for them at the level they're at. So how does safety work for them in their role? As I say, very often in a management position, it's sort of assumed that you will take responsibility for certain aspects of safety. Again, maybe there's some KPIs or targets around getting out and doing so many inspections or audits or closeouts from incidents. There may be some very tangible things. But how do people feel about those areas of their role? Do they embrace them and think, yes, this is the right thing to do, I'm behind this, I'm positive about it, and I'm going to get out there and do it? Or do they think, I have just got too many plates to spin trying to get performance and keep performance and production up, safety stuff I just do, on the odd days in between when I can? Or they may be on the really negative end of, actually, safety is for the safety team, and I just really don't want to have to do any of it. I'm a manager, I have to deal with production and problems around that, and safety should be done by the safety team. So again, if you've got managers and supervisors in the latter end there who think that safety is all really should all be done by the safety team, then again, if you're looking at levels of maturity, that's very low down, because you are always going to find that they've never got time and they're always too busy to do things, and that gives people, their teams, the completely wrong impression about safety. So it's key to know these things. So as I say, how they feel about it is crucial, and how involved they are or wish to be. Now, it's easier said than done to try and get people to talk about this. Very often you may have a clue or have an inkling from the type of feedback you get from them when you ask them a direct question, or it's the type of things that they actually do or don't contribute in meetings, for example. You know people who are proactively out there working on your side, and those who wish they could get out of it if they could, and who only do it because it's a target they have to hit. But taking that, so we looked at that sort of from a manager's position there, but equally from the guys on the ground, it's really important that you understand whether they're in the health and safety stops me doing my job brigade, or they understand that the safety team and the managers and everything that's being done about safety is done for the right reasons, and therefore they're going to be behind any changes you want to make. Yes, key. People get an instant feeling inside us, it's part of our subconscious, as to whether someone's telling the truth or not. So we can have a very loud, clear message from the top of the organisation, but if people don't believe a word of it, it doesn't matter how many times you sprout it, or you say it. So actions speak louder than words with this type of thing. If your directors and senior team are out there doing inspections, getting involved in investigations, hands-on when it comes to a problem, people will have far more faith that what they say when they're talking about safety is actually what they believe in. And these are the things you've got to find out during your safety culture assessment. These are the areas that really are part and parcel of the tangible aspects of safety culture. So how do we do this? Well, one of the ways that I spend my life quite happily going out is to talk to people, quite literally, in organisations, at all levels of the organisation, in small groups, interviewing them through a very structured 16-statement safety culture questionnaire which we've developed, which gives me and my colleagues that do this a great opportunity to get people to open up and discuss those issues we've just talked about. How is safety operating in their role? How do they feel about it? How well can they do it? Are they completely sort of overrun with other tasks that safety always takes a back seat in terms of them getting out and actually doing anything actively? So, as I said, what this gives us is this chance to capture their feelings. But also as well, what I do as I scribble down my notes is I'm getting some real nitty-gritty qualitative feedback, which could go along with the graphs that come from the score sheets they tick as well at the same time. So as well as having some graphs to look at, which give us some strength of feeling again, when I come to writing the report, I've got some great local, real-life feedback from all levels of the organisation about the sorts of things that are happening, the sorts of things that are going well, the sorts of things that are still not sorted. Sometimes the sorts of things they tell me will make your hair curl, but I'm very careful how I feed these things back. And I do promise people that they're not going to be tapped on the shoulder and marched out the door. So, as I say, it's quite an entertaining process. And what it gives you is this understanding of their perception, which gives you an insight into their attitudes about safety. And often, I can see a real turmoil sometimes in people. They want to get on board with a lot of the safety things, but they're not included. They're not brought. There's no buy-in for them locally. It's not supported by their first-line manager. So on a personal level, there's not much they feel they can do. So it's really understanding the complex relationships between these different levels. Certainly, as I'm sure you all know, the employee sort of ground level and first-line manager level are crucial in that relationship in terms of the actual getting to the nitty-gritty of safety and safe and unsafe behaviour. And often, the first-line supervisor level is just promoted because they happen to be good at the job. They have little training and they have little understanding of what their role is really about. And that can come out in some really negative relaying of your clear safety message, and almost a clear perception from the guys in the team that actually they're not interested in following up anything that's brought to them. So whereas you might be trying to encourage the number of near misses reported, if every time the employee brings a near miss to his supervisor and he goes, oh, I haven't got time to deal with this, again, are they going to carry on bringing them in? No, they're not. So knowing that these, understanding these things and seeing how the interaction is going on in these teams is really, really important. Because what this gives you then is not just a strength of feeling about various aspects of safety as you get from the climate survey. It also gives you some real practical next steps, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So I'm just going to show you one of the graphs that comes through from our culture assessment. This is a really key area of this particular question. And what we have is we don't have statements where you agree or disagree. We have statements which have a positive side, so there is a strong belief that all injuries are preventable, and a negative side, so at the HN there is a strong belief injuries are not preventable. Okay, and there we have one of the graphs that comes through from our survey. So what we do is, obviously during the interview we get people to fill in a score sheet which they tick A, B, C, D or E, F, G, H, and whilst they're sitting discussing it, and as I say, the 16 statements that cover those 5 areas of safety culture we talked about at the beginning. And as you see there, in this particular organisation, we only spoke to managers, supervisors and employees, so that's your key at the side of the graph. Managers in blue, supervisors in red, and employees in yellow. Now, sometimes we'll also get senior level or director level, and that can be on there as well. So what we have here is a typical bar chart that shows us that in this particular organisation, about this idea of preventing injuries, the supervisors are actually leading the fray, really, in terms of their commitment to that and their belief about that. Managers are kind of scattered across the whole level of scores, which shows that, again, you've maybe got some managers who've been on workshops and have got a higher level of awareness of the idea that you can prevent injuries. Maybe these particular managers are taking more active part in accident investigation. And then other managers who just maybe are in the safety's not much to do with me, and actually you can't prevent injuries anyway. I hear a lot of people tell me that you can't stop planes falling out of the sky. It's always quite a funny one. And then the employees are quite an interesting one. You've got a couple who are venturing us to all a positive end, but they're actually, by and large, for the group middle to the negative end. And that's a fairly common sight. Well, this was to see when we first start with organisations, mainly because they don't understand the way that injuries and accidents happen. They've not got a lot of knowledge of accident prevention. So if you just got that graph, that would have been quite an interesting exercise for you, and that's the sort of thing you probably get back from a climate survey. So we know our employees have quite a negative view, and we could maybe work on improving that. But what we find is, by having these little group interviews, we have a much more in-depth view of from each level. When we do the interviews, we never mix the levels. So we'll have a group of employees, or quite a lot of employees, because they're always the largest proportion of people on the site. We'll have supervisors together, we'll have managers together. Sometimes we see senior managers, and very often they'll go separately. So we are always encouraging people to feel comfortable to talk within their peer group. And so what comes out of this? Well, this is the sort of comments we get back. If you can't see my screen, I shall read them out because I'm not sure if everyone's on the screen or whether you're calling in. So managers, you can stop some but not all. You just can't stop all of them. It's not possible. Things just happen. Supervisors, you can't prevent the major ones. You can prevent the major ones if you try. So that's a bit more positive. You can't stop the idiots. This is quite funny. I get a lot of supervisors who think that the reason people are injured is because they're an idiot and they're stupid. And often their actions that that supervisors catch people doing are very stupid and ridiculous, really, when you think about the situation they're working in. But it isn't just about, if you stop people being stupid, and trying to educate everyone that accidents can just happen at any time, and it's not just about people's behaviour. That's quite difficult, because very often it is behaviour that's led to the incident we're talking about, or the last incident that they can think about. But it's about realising that accidents just happen. Things happen, and it's that chance element that you've got to be always aware of. And then, yeah, always human error. So it's nothing we can stop. It's sort of outside of my control. And when you look at this, it's very much, for both of these levels, what can we do? We can't do anything about this, So we can stop the major ones by putting in guards or putting in process, but we can't stop people behaving stupidly. And then the employees, oh no, you can't stop them. They're very much in the camp of you'll never stop in accidents. You'll never stop injuries. And always they always feel it's because of their particular work environment. Whenever I'm talking to people, you can't stop it in this job. You'll never stop this type of injury in this job. So engineers and technicians will never stop hitting their thumbs with hammers, and people in offices will never stop having paper cuts. And it's very much if you think about that as a belief, when you hear people talk like that, very much a fait accompli. It's we can't stop it. So there's almost that element of, we just do what we can, but we'll have to accept that these things are going to happen. Yeah, can't predict. Okay. So the reason that it's important we get this underlying assessment of their perception and their belief is that we need to know that from the point of view of that's what's driving their behaviour, and that's what will drive how they react to things you suggest in terms of improvement. So when they're in the camp of, as we've just described, it's all very out of their control and they can't do anything about it and it's going to happen anyway. It's very hard to bring them on board in improvement processes without trying to tackle and raise awareness within them of that negative attitude they have. And that's only going to happen very often through looking at the evidence they get in terms of feedback about accidents in this particular situation, this particular question. As soon as people start to see the real benefits of prevention and being proactive about looking at hazards and near misses, they start to see that you can prevent these things as long as you know about them. But very often, one of the issues that is identified is that the communication is not very good. So the feedback they get on anything that happens is minuscule or nothing at all or very late. So these things are hand in glove. And as I say, if you don't understand this, you may start something that completely pushes quite a lot of people in a different direction than you were anticipating. And you can start things that falter and fail at the first hurdle because you didn't understand the depth of feeling behind it. But also you can start things that actually make improvements in one area you've identified but undo something else in another. So it's really important to get this feeling and this level of understanding. So let's go back to this company we were looking at and look at their chart 2 years further on. And this is what we did with them. We worked with them looking at improving the cultural knowledge of their senior team and the awareness of the leaders in the organisation as to how responsible they were for safety and how effectively they could improve safety culture or could hinder it if they weren't behind it. And you can see there that the managers are very much moved up the scale. There are still in the negative camp, but by and large, half of them have got a lot more positive and a lot more in the area of accepting that they have to take some responsibility for preventing injuries, and they believe that they can do that. Supervisors are going to strengthen together there, and they were sort of positive before, but they've got a lot stronger together. And although employees maybe look a lot more sort of strewn out across the whole of the survey, they've now actually sort of half of them have moved into the positive camp. There's still half in the negative camp, and unfortunately you will always have a sort of residual level of people who will hold on to this idea that you can never prevent injuries, no matter what you do with them. The only way you can really get them all into the positive side is, as I say, to really have a very strong near-miss reporting system that identifies and shows the investigation and the ways that you are identifying root cause and the improvements you make from that. So over time, you can improve this perception. Okay, let's again look at the comments that are coming back. So managers, a bit more, they've started to get more involved in investigations by now, and they're taking more responsibility, as I say, to actually personally get involved in incident investigation closeout of near misses. So those tangible actions we talked about at the very beginning of the webinar this morning, the things that maybe they've got a KPI for that they were doing but to tick a box, they've now actually got behind the process and are learning from that process themselves and have realised that actually, you can prevent a lot of these things. And when they see investigations take place or they're part of that, they realise that there's a lot more they could be doing. And the situation for this organisation was that they were finding that they had improved a lot more of their process and procedure, and now they were very much left with poor behaviour as their main problem. So the near-miss system was another thing that had been there, but again, just bumbling along with people doing an odd one just to meet a target. And now that had really been beefed up in terms of rewards for people who handed things in, if it was a good idea or it was a good catch, as they call it, and real tangible feedback. Shared learning from these near misses was becoming more of the norm. So people knew about other things that were happening in other areas of the site, and they were learning from that. So that also adds to your belief that you can change things. If you can see that other areas have done that as well. So again, they've strengthened that belief that you can prevent the major ones, and they're now recognising that it's harder with the smaller stuff because their problem is they don't know about it, and that they're getting people they'll report near misses but won't necessarily report minor injuries. So this was the area we were having to work on now. And employees, they're starting to see that they're starting to get this filtered down information from the feedback that's coming through, that actually things are being prevented because they're seeing more active investigation. So again, all of this has improved because of this communication of feeding back and learning from incidents and near misses. And then, of course, you've still got the chance, the ones that are in the hardcore group, who will always hold on to the idea that it's just the nature of the job. So, again, any questions at this point? I've whistle-stopped through there, but if you've got any questions about the process of actually running a survey, then please put your hand up and ask away.
Hi Liz, I've had a few questions that have come through. Peter Reeves
Yep.
has asked, how can the culture assessment be externally benchmarked against similar organisations, industries?
Right. Yes. Okay. Well, what we've got I've got a slide towards the end of that. The difficulty with benchmarking is getting a tangible set of figures that you can successfully compare yourself to other organisations. And often the data that's given out by organisations is their lost time injury rates or their accident frequency rates. And it all tends to be around accident data. And as you know, that can be quite a good benchmark in terms of looking at what is the industry standard. But very often, companies who don't have a very good culture often don't report a lot of the things that happen. So it can be quite misleading to just focus on benchmarking yourself purely on accident data. And as I say, I've been sort of talking about levels of maturity, and we're going to come on to that towards the end of this morning's presentation. And I'm actually going to do a more in-depth presentation on the benchmarking tool that we use in my next webinar. Okay, any more?
Yes, Christopher Gale has asked, how do you deal with staff who believe they already have a high level of safety awareness?
Yes, without sort of wanting to just prove them wrong. And of course, the only way, very often what I find is staff who say to me, well, we can't be that bad because no one's had an injury here for years. Oh, I've never had an injury, I've done this job for 30 years. I think very often you need to look at the level of of their awareness and their understanding of safety per se. So what's their education level like there? Because very often, I mean, I just worked with a company that when I did the safety culture for their Angolan site, they were all incredibly positive and happy. But when you look at the situation there, it's incredibly low level operation in terms of safety. But because the staff had all been given high-vis jackets and safety boots, so as far as they were concerned, safety was really high priority and couldn't get any better compared to the week before where they were in flip-flops. So it's perception. It's your level of understanding or his level of understanding, or the staff's level of understanding that's crucial. You know, are they basing their assumption on from a good educational level as far as safety is concerned? So you know, you may find that you can see how it should be better, but you've got to find a way of educating them to understand your view, and that may be sending them out on a NEBOSH course or that type of level of health and safety training, or it may be something that's about getting them to understand the cultural level of maturity and the cultural level of safety operations, and not just about ticking boxes. I hope I've got that one. Okay, any more?
I have a final question. How do you construct your model questions for the interviews?
Well, as I said, use those 5 topic areas, so those 5 areas of safety culture. Those 5 areas have been put together from research that's been done into safety culture and the effectiveness of improving your safety culture. There's lots of literature out there on, how improving safety culture can improve safety performance now. Because originally, when a lot of this data, the research was done, it was trying to establish, why some of these major tragedies had happened, and it came down to being a cultural failing. And that in itself was a great eye-opener, but there's been a lot more research since that says, what is culture and what does it actually tangibly come down to? And really those 5 key areas that we had on one of the opening slides are really important. We can send slides out if people are busy trying to take notes. We'll send a slide pack out at the end of the webinar. So as I say, leadership and commitment are your crucial areas, and so and your supervision and your employee engagement in improvement, and in how employees think of responsibility and communication are the key areas. And what you need to be thinking is how can you formulate questions that are specific to your site, that ask about those specific, ask about the areas, those 5 areas. So you can ask questions that are specifically looking to identify whether people are experiencing good communication, for example. What are the methods of communication? How do they find out about things? So we're going to look at prioritizing actions, and that might help you there, because if you know there are areas that you really need to cover, that you are aware are maybe not working very well, then those are obviously going to be a high priority on your list. But in terms of the actual formulation of the question, as I say, the most common ones are to ask people how readily they agree or disagree. Don't ask yes or no questions, because you force people into a choice, and often people don't like that. We like to have a bit more say. In terms of formulating a question, if you can ask people to give you some feedback in terms of a comment underneath, that can be very useful, because you're gathering that quantitative and the qualitative data together. The only problem with that is it takes a lot of administration and time to actually collate the comments that come into something tangible, because random comments on their own are not going to be useful. You've got to collate that. This is what I spend a lot of my time doing, is all those comments you've seen on the screen, I collate that into a report. Because what you want to find are the common threads that are coming through, the patterns that are coming through in what people are saying. So as I said, try and formulate some questions that are related to those 5 areas that we've mentioned, but are pertinent to your particular operation, because people like questions that are relevant to what they're doing. Generic questions, although we use generic questions in a way to get to provoke thought in people, we are doing it as part of the interview process, so therefore you can get more, get them to concentrate onto their own reality of the situation they work in. So I've seen general questions in surveys, things like, how safe do you feel? Well, as I say, if you've never had a pair of safety boots on and you've suddenly got a pair, you maybe feel very safe. It doesn't mean you're actually working in a safe environment, or that safety is a priority, or that it's actually any good. So questions like that are just not really helpful. Be specific and ask people to comment on the specific things that they are experiencing, I would say is my advice in terms of developing a question. Okay. Is that it, Sinead? Is that question-wise?
Yes, thank you very much, Liz.
Okay, great. I'll move on then as we're coming to the last few slides. So as I said, when you've actually done your survey and you've got your outcomes and your data back, and you're maybe thinking of the next step, you really need to think about again, the most tangible ways of improvement, of getting improvement. Because it's very easy to hone in on something that comes back that's negative and that seems like a major issue, but actually using this opportunity that you've gathered to get some strength and some general areas through your organisation will help you in whatever that you then decide to prioritise. So look at the feedback on communication methods. Look at how people are getting there through. When you actually tried to do the survey, how hard or easy was it to talk to the ground floor staff? Now, the logistics of running a survey sometimes mean that it's very easy for people who sit at a computer to fill in. So if you look at the numbers that come back, it's often managers, people who work in the office, and then an odd 1 or 2 from the ground floor team, because they haven't got time to come in and sit on a computer. So look at the logistics of before you start one of these surveys. Look at the logistics of how are people going to do this, and how easy is it going to be for everyone to fill in? Because what you'll find is, if it's online and it's a computer-based process, although that's the easiest way to gather data for you, it's actually sometimes the hardest way to get, as I say, to get the ground floor teams to take part. So as you're going through the process of getting people to do this, use this part of it as there may be frustrations based on people's attitudes to taking part in it, but that's telling you a lot. Make note of those things. Don't just get frustrated by them. There'll be teams who get through it very easily, and that's because they have great communication and work effectively as a team. So look at those, that part of the process right from the beginning, not just from when the data comes in. So then, don't be tempted to just rush into the first negative thing you see. Think about what was positive. Think about the things you know are working well. And again, we want to praise. It's a bit like positive parenting. We want to praise things that are working well. We want to celebrate the success of things that are going well. Because people who are very often doing the right things maybe don't know they're doing the right things. They just do it because that's the right thing to do for them. And if they're intrinsically like that, then you want to promote that so that they know it's okay to spread the message. So where you find people who are adopting good process and they're doing things for the right reason and they're effectively working with teams, as I say, get out there and praise them and make sure it's recognised before you start trying to change other things. Because what happens is people lose hope. They think, oh well, I might as well not bother being the only one who does the toolbox talks, because nobody ever pats me on the back and says thank you. Nobody cares if I do it, and then the other supervisor doesn't. So recognise these things that are working well. would say, reward doesn't have to be a big bonus or a big gesture. I know some companies that give a breakfast voucher to people who sent in the most near misses. Now, okay, you may say that gets you some rubbish ones, but if it gets people looking for things and it gets, it gives you the opportunity to promote the process. So, look at ways of visually and very verbally and very clearly promoting good practice when you see it. And when you do decide the things you need to change and you've recognised them, there needs to be improvement, do it by involving people and engaging with them. And that is people from the ground. Because what I see a lot of is that you get first-line managers, I put first-line supervisors there, are often brought in to the sort of management team process and included in the development or the implementation or the change or whatever you want to call it. But the guys on the ground very much just told this is going to happen. And you may think that you're encouraging your first-line supervisors to go out there and talk with the guys. But again, as we've discussed, if that comprises of them being lectured at the start of shift brief, oh, by the way, this is going to happen now. They did that survey thing, and now this is going to happen. It's all very negative. You need to have you need to be very clear that the communication process of how these things are discussed and planned is very much a two-way process, and people have got to understand that they can get involved in the decision making and the design of any change, especially as it affects them. Because, as we always say, buy-in will get people to be more involved, but I don't think people realise how important that is, because if it's not there, then as soon as you take your eye off it, it'll just revert back to how it was. So it's really important that any change is driven from the top. It needs to be supported from the top, but it must include the ground level. Okay, I'm not even going to elaborate on this too much. Feedback. Okay, I know I go to lots of companies where we go into a survey and they go, oh, not another one. We've had loads. And they say, well, what's happened after this? Don't know, nothing, never hear anything. Because often the only feedback that happens is maybe some stats go up on the safety board, or maybe in meetings there's some feedback. Oh, thank you for taking part, and this was what we found. If you're in a higher level of the organisation. But certainly from the ground floor level, again, they very often hear nothing at all. So feedback as often as you can verbally, if you can get or the team that's been working on it, get them to go out and give some feedback and admit if there are things wrong, admit that things need to change or things are going to change, and start to encourage that engagement process right from the off. Because if you don't give some feedback, then if you try and do another one, people will go, oh, I'm not going to bother with that. There's no point to it. So with that in mind, as my clock now strikes 9 in my room here, I think we've come to the end. I was just going to say, for those who are interested in the benchmark exercise, once you've got your level of cultural maturity, you can then start to look at yourself against other organisations, and we have a particular tool that's very useful for that. What you are, as I say, what you tend to find is the only data available, or a lot of the data available, is very much around safety performance, and that can be quite misleading. But it can be a good starting point to see if your safety performance levels are miles away from the sort of industry standard. And all that information is available on the HSC. What we have developed here at JOMC is a benchmarking tool which is taking the actions of people at all levels of the organisation to sort of identify where they are, because you can have an overall level of maturity, but very often the sort of more useful information is to find out where your directors are, and through to your employee level. And this is quite a complex tool in the sense of the amount of questions it asks. But what it basically is looking at is things like how are people driven in the organisation, and what are their drivers, what are their, what are they being rewarded for. So you may have an organisation that has a very good safety record, but it's very much by chance because the main overriding culture within the teams and within the management is performance, is production performance, and that's what's measured, and that's what's looked at, and that's what takes focus, and that's what drives people. So it's important when you're trying to benchmark to get a level of maturity that you look at it from the right angle, because, and that you look at it from the point of view of what actions people take on a daily basis. That really shows that, and what is their feeling behind that. So as I say, as I said all the way through, are people doing things because it ticks the box and it achieves KPI, or are they doing things because they want people in this organisation to go home safely? If you're at the bottom, if you're at the first tick box stage, you are at the bottom level of maturity. If you're getting more into this is the right thing to do, this is the only way to be, I don't want my colleagues hurt, I don't want to be part of any major investigation into an incident because it will be horrendous for the family, etc. If that's your thinking and your driver of your senior team, then you're getting more into a much more mature level of culture, which is where you're headed towards a more world excellent sort of level of maturity. But that takes a lot of awareness raising and a lot of communication and engagement to bring everybody on board. So with that in mind, as I say, benchmarking can be quite useful as a way of looking at site against site, but the danger is with that street competition can often mean people hide things. And again, externally, you can look at other organisations, and maybe there are other organisations you work with in terms quite closely, and who you could sort of seek to develop forums and develop shared learning activities, which would help then to sort of get a feel for where you are compared to them. So I don't know, there's a lot of construction areas in the world of construction. They have a lot of forums which are about, for contractors, for supply chain, where they are getting together and they're discussing these types of issues and where they are individually and what they can share between them. So, it's worth looking within your industry as to what is going on that you can maybe get involved with, which would then give you some idea of how to benchmark yourself against them. Okay. So just to summarise, as I said, your standard measure of safety culture, you end up with a score and maybe some nice quantitative data, but you maybe don't have a real understanding of the beliefs behind those scores and the way people feel. By going more into a face-to-face interview in groups, focus groups, one-to-one, you can get a taste of some real, the real life issues people are facing, and that can give you a much more in-depth report alongside your graph. And when you've got this sort of information, the next step would be about to sort of think about benchmarking yourself, to look at how you can sort of compare site to site, and then again, as I say, externally. So, my letters have been cut off by the picture, sorry there. So what I've said there is, as I said, we've got a tool we use. It's quite in-depth, it's quite complicated initially to understand all the factors to it, but it can be a very useful next phase once you start to measure your safety culture. And I will be happy to do another webinar my next webinar on this benchmarking in a lot more detail, and I can give you access to the information about the tool prior to the call, which would help you understand the various areas of benchmarking. But and so we'll send you details of that once the date is set. Okay. Any more questions at this point?
Hi Liz, I've got a question from Christopher Gale about benchmarking. Is it important to use the same tool to measure what your culture maturity is compared to the organisation you are comparing against?
Well, as I said, this is the difficulty you have because unless within your industry there is a common benchmarking tool that you can get your hands on and you know that this is what you will be looking at, there's as I say, very often there's the data out there in terms of whether you're comparing yourself, like for like, is quite limited. So what I would suggest is if there is a common tool that you use, and for example, if you're using the HSE climate tool for safety culture, I'm sure now there's data that's been going long enough. There'll be data around that. As to give you so if you're scoring, what it would tell you is if you're scoring in these areas, this is the sort of level you are in terms of other organisations. The danger with these things is again trying to find organisations to compare yourself to that are similar, are like, even construction for example, construction companies can be very different in the makeup and how they operate and how they work. And so the difficulties, for example, of communicating can be very different, and the effectiveness of your communication is very different depending on the number of people you have and how spread out they are. And so there's a lot of areas you need to take into consideration when you're trying to look at these things. So as I said, this webinar has been very much about measuring the culture and the effectiveness of that, and making sure that when you do measure, you are looking at the right areas and not just glossing over the actual outputs of the effectiveness of the outputs of some of these areas. You may be able to review via your management system. And as you say, benchmarking is a next step really that we can look on at more detail in the next webinar. Or if you've got more questions, then please just email them over, and I can send you more information about this our tool that we use. Okay, thank you. Any more?
No, that's it, Liz. Thank you very much, and thank you to everybody who attended, and we apologise for the technical difficulties.
Yeah, sorry, I realised halfway through that I hadn't even said who I was. So yes, Liz Fields Pattinson, who you've been listening to. Thank you very much.
Thank you.